Arben, Dritan, and Ilir were just ordinary men living in Europe's shadows. But behind closed doors, they built an empire that controlled the continent's cocaine routes, outsmarted law enforcement, and vanished without a trace. This is the story of how the Albanian Mafia rose from obscurity to dominate Europe as underworld. The rise of the Albanian network began far from the eyes of European authorities, in the quiet corners of migrant neighborhoods where no one paid attention to who came and who left. In the late 1990s, Europe was busy dealing with political changes, economic shifts, and new waves of immigration. Among the thousands seeking work and stability were young Albanians escaping poverty and unrest. Most blended into the crowd, taking night shifts at construction sites, restaurants, and small factories. Hidden within them was a small group that carried a different ambition. They watched how Europe functioned, how its borders worked, how law enforcement struggled with growing international crime, and how ports overflowed with cargo that no agency could fully control. Their early years were spent studying, not acting. They moved through different cities: Milan, Brussels, Rotterdam, Hamburg, learning the street economy step by step. Instead of rushing to make money, they observed which gangs were strong, which were declining, and which territories were loosely controlled. They realized that the biggest weakness in Europe's criminal world was disorganization. Many established groups were too focused on internal rivalries, flaunting wealth, or maintaining old traditions. This Albanian group, however, valued silence over reputation and strategy over aggression. Their goal was not power in the traditional sense, but long-term control over routes that mattered. They avoided violence during their early operations because they understood how quickly it could attract police attention. They preferred small, unnoticed opportunities selling counterfeit goods, arranging minor smuggling jobs, or transporting items that seemed harmless but built connections with corrupt officials. Every small task allowed them to test systems, understand vulnerabilities, and identify individuals who could be bribed or influenced. They moved slowly but intelligently, piece by piece building a foundation that other gangs never realized existed. Their structure formed naturally. Most of them were related through blood, village ties, or childhood friendships. This gave them a level of trust that rival gangs struggled to match. They communicated in coded language and shifted between safe houses without leaving patterns. Anyone who attempted to leak information was quietly removed, not in a dramatic way, but through relocations, disappearances, or silent threats that needed no explanation. Their internal discipline became the backbone of their growing operations. As the years passed, their influence spread quietly. They gained small control over local dealers, truck drivers, and low-level criminals who needed cash. They were never the largest group, and they never pretended to be. Their advantage came from invisibility. While other gangs made news headlines, this group existed in the shadows, building networks inside Europe's transportation and shipping systems. Their members blended in as workers, immigrants, and ordinary residents, yet each had a role that contributed to the larger plan. By the time authorities realized that a new force was forming, it was already too late. The Albanians had positioned themselves at key ports, trucking companies, customs offices, and distribution hubs. What began as a small group of unnoticed migrants had transformed into a disciplined, well-organized network ready to step into the world of high-level trafficking. Their rise had been silent, slow, and almost invisible, but their foundation was strong enough to support an empire that would eventually reach across Europe. The city of Rotterdam became the first major proving ground for the Albanian network, and it was no accident. As Europe's busiest port, Rotterdam handled thousands of containers daily, filled with goods arriving from every corner of the world. To outsiders, it was a place of commerce and industry, a hub for ships, cranes, and workers moving under tight schedules. But for the Albanians, it was an opportunity waiting to be seized. They spent months studying the port, observing the flow of containers, the routines of dock workers, and the patterns of security inspections. Unlike other gangs who relied on violence or intimidation, they relied on patience and careful observation. They noted that most inspections were random and that the sheer volume of cargo made it impossible for authorities to check every container thoroughly. At first, they started small. They approached dock workers and shipping assistants who were struggling to make ends meet. These individuals were often overlooked, paid meager wages, and desperate for extra cash. Cocaine began arriving in larger shipments, hidden within cargo in ways that required knowledge, precision, and careful timing. They quietly observed rival groups, understanding which gangs controlled local streets and which distribution points were vulnerable. Instead of engaging in open conflict, they waited for the right moment to step in, exploiting weaknesses and forming alliances when advantageous. Their careful, methodical approach ensured minimal exposure while maximizing profit. Unlike other criminal organizations, they did not seek fame or headlines. Their goal was efficiency and control. Every container that arrived successfully reinforced their strategy. They refined their techniques, trained their operatives, and developed encrypted communication methods to coordinate shipments across borders. Even when authorities discovered small discrepancies, there was never enough evidence to trace the operations back to a single source. Rotterdam had become more than just a port. It was a laboratory where the Albanians tested the limits of European law enforcement, learning how to manipulate systems, exploit loopholes, and move large quantities of cocaine with minimal risk. By the time their operations became fully established, the Albanians had transformed Rotterdam from a simple point of entry into a highly organized hub for the European cocaine trade. The port, bustling with legitimate commerce, masked one of the continent's most sophisticated criminal networks. Their patience, observation, and strategic alliances allowed them to build a foundation that would later extend into other countries. Rotterdam was not only a starting point, but the blueprint for the empire they intended to create, a quiet, invisible force capable of challenging even the most established criminal organizations in Europe. The strength of the Albanian network did not come from violence numbers or intimidation. It came from its structure. Unlike traditional mafia organizations, which relied on a visible hierarchy and flamboyant leaders, this group operated as a secretive and decentralized network. Each member had a specific role, but very few knew the full scope of operations. Finance, transport, bribery, and distribution were all handled separately, reducing the risk of exposure. Even within small cells, loyalty was absolute. Everyone had been tested before joining, often through family connections, childhood friendships, or mutual trust developed over years of shared hardship. Betrayal was virtually unthinkable, and anyone who even hinted at disloyalty disappeared quietly. Leaving no traces behind. Communication was equally sophisticated. Members relied on encrypted phones, coded messages, and dead drops to relay information. Meetings were rare, always small, and often staged as ordinary social gatherings. By avoiding large, noticeable gatherings, the group eliminated the risk of surveillance or interception. Even when authorities managed to arrest a low-level operative, the information they could provide was limited and compartmentalized, offering no clue to the larger network. This secrecy allowed the Albanians to operate on a scale that rival organizations could not. Matched out trust and loyalty were reinforced by strict codes of conduct. Members were expected to follow rules without question, and any deviation was treated as a threat to the network itself. Internal discipline was enforced subtly but firmly, often through intimidation or the silent removal of those who could not comply. There were no public displays of punishment, no dramatic warnings. Everything happened behind the scenes. This made the organization nearly impenetrable from the outside and nearly unshakable from within. The sense of belonging and purpose was so strong that most members would have risked imprisonment or worse, rather than betray the network. The Albanian model was different from anything European law enforcement had faced. While Italian or Spanish groups relied on reputation, violence, and public displays of power, the Albanians remained invisible, predictable only in their efficiency. This allowed them to infiltrate supply chains, ports, and transportation hubs without drawing attention. They quietly moved cocaine from South America, through European ports, and into cities across the continent, all while avoiding headlines and scrutiny. They invested time in understanding every detail of the systems they operated in, from customs procedures to banking regulations, allowing them to stay several steps ahead of authorities. Another factor in their strength was flexibility. The network could adapt quickly to threats, whether from law enforcement, rival gangs, or internal disputes. Members could be relocated without notice, shipments rerouted, and operations modified without disrupting the overall flow. This resilience made it nearly impossible to dismantle the network in a single strike. While other criminal organizations were often crippled by arrests or betrayals, the Albanian system absorbed shocks and continued functioning. By combining secrecy, discipline, trust, and adaptability, the Albanian network created an almost invisible empire. It operated like a shadow economy within Europe, exploiting weaknesses, controlling key points, and avoiding unnecessary exposure. While outsiders saw only scattered arrests or small seizures, the reality was that a sophisticated, highly organized network was quietly taking control of Europe's cocaine routes. The structure of this network, silent yet powerful, would soon become the foundation upon which one of the most formidable criminal empires the continent had ever seen would rise. The breakthrough in South America marked a turning point for the Albanian network, transforming it from a regional player into a continental force. While most European criminal organizations struggled with unreliable suppliers and violent disputes over shipments, the Albanians approached the problem differently. They sent carefully selected members to Colombia, where they spent months studying the coca plantations, the local trade networks, and the operations of established drug cartels. Unlike other groups that relied on intimidation or bribes alone, the Albanians offered a combination of reliability, discretion, and efficiency that few could match. Their goal was not to confront the powerful Colombian cartels directly, but to earn their trust and secure long-term access to high-quality cocaine. Their approach was methodical. They observed the flow of goods, learned the routes used to transport cocaine from remote farms to major ports, and identified weak points where shipments were vulnerable to theft or law enforcement intervention. They offered the producers guaranteed payment and strict adherence to deadlines, something many other buyers could not promise. This reliability quickly earned them a reputation as a trusted partner, unusual in an industry often plagued by betrayal and sudden violence. By demonstrating their organizational skills and financial stability, they gained access to priority shipments and favorable pricing, giving them a significant advantage over European rivals. The Albanians also relied on discipline and secrecy during these dealings. Unlike other European buyers who might flaunt wealth or travel with large entourages, they moved in small, inconspicuous teams. Their members avoided unnecessary attention, blending in as business people or logistics experts rather than criminals. This low-profile approach allowed them to negotiate deals that might have been impossible for more conspicuous groups. Over time, they secured a network of contacts across Colombia, connecting with both small producers and influential cartel figures. These connections ensured a steady, reliable flow of cocaine into Europe, bypassing many of the traditional bottlenecks that slowed or threatened shipments from South America. Once these arrangements were in place, the Albanians refined the transportation process. Cocaine was moved in carefully coordinated shipments, often hidden within legitimate goods or transported through routes that law enforcement rarely monitored. Their European contacts ensured that the drugs could reach ports in Rotterdam, Antwerp, and Spain without detection, while insiders at warehouses and shipping companies facilitated smooth transfers. By controlling multiple points in this supply chain, from production to transport to distribution, they minimized risk and maximized profit. This breakthrough also shifted the balance of power in Europe. Italian, Spanish, and Balkan groups, long accustomed to controlling cocaine imports, found themselves increasingly reliant on the Albanians. Unlike other networks that were fractured by internal disputes or inefficient logistics, the Albanians offered consistency and security. Rivals began to recognize that this new group was not just another competitor, but a force capable of dominating the market. Their control over both supply and distribution allowed them to expand rapidly across European cities, establishing a presence in areas previously dominated by long-established gangs. By the end of this phase, the Albanian network had secured more than just shipments. They had built an international reputation as efficient, reliable, and ruthless in their discipline. South America had become the foundation for their European empire, a source of both product and power. With these connections, they could dictate terms, move massive quantities of cocaine with minimal interference, and continue growing their influence quietly, efficiently, and invisibly. The breakthrough in South America was no longer just an achievement. It was the stepping stone that turned a hidden network into a true continental powerhouse, poised to take control of Europe's cocaine routes. With a steady supply of cocaine secured from South America, the Albanian network moved to consolidate its influence across Europe. Their approach was systematic, strategic, and methodical, relying on precision rather than open conflict. They did not seek headlines, flashy displays of power, or public violence. Instead, they focused on creating a seamless system for distribution, moving drugs from ports to cities while minimizing exposure and maximizing efficiency. Each member had a clear role, and each step in the supply chain was carefully planned to avoid mistakes. Over time, this quiet dominance allowed them to take control of territories once managed by more established gangs in Italy, Spain, Germany, and the Balkans. Distribution networks were their next focus. The Albanians understood that controlling supply alone was not enough. They needed reliable channels to deliver drugs to the streets without detection. They recruited local operatives in various cities, training them to handle transportation, storage, and handovers with precision. Unlike other gangs, they avoided chaotic street-level operations that often attracted police attention. Instead, drugs were moved in small, discreet amounts, hidden in vehicles, warehouses, and even legitimate businesses. These methods allowed them to expand their reach quickly and quietly, outpacing rivals who relied on outdated or reckless strategies. Control over rival groups became another key factor in their expansion. The Albanians did not wage open war unless absolutely necessary. Instead, they used intimidation, financial leverage, and strategic alliances to bring competing organizations under their influence. Some rival leaders were paid off to cooperate, others quietly replaced by loyal members of the Albanian network. Their discipline and organization made resistance difficult. Even gangs with a history of violence found themselves unable to compete with the Albanians' combination of secrecy, strategy, and efficiency. Slowly, cities across Europe were brought under their control, and the network's influence expanded from ports to urban distribution points, shaping the cocaine trade on an unprecedented scale. Their operations also benefited from technology and encrypted communication. Orders were coordinated through secure channels, shipments tracked with precision, and internal messages encoded to prevent interception. They avoided mistakes that often exposed other criminal organizations, such as leaving evidence, overspending, or drawing attention with public conflicts. By operating like a well-oiled machine, the Albanians maintained both flexibility and resilience, adapting quickly to threats from law enforcement or rival groups while continuing to grow their empire. As their European footprint expanded, the network became remarkably invisible. Police reports occasionally mentioned arrests or seizures, but no one could identify the central force orchestrating these movements. The Albanians avoided direct contact with law enforcement, and their members rarely stayed in one place for long. Even financial operations were disguised through shell companies, legal businesses, and complex banking routes that hid the origins and destinations of money. Their ability to integrate into legitimate systems while controlling illegal operations made them exceptionally difficult to trace. By the end of this phase, the Albanian network had established itself as a dominant force in Europe. From ports to cities, from suppliers to distributors, they controlled multiple layers of the cocaine trade. Their quiet efficiency and careful planning had allowed them to surpass traditional criminal organizations, creating a network that was disciplined, adaptable, and nearly invisible. Rivals were pushed out, law enforcement remained a step behind, and the Albanians had transformed from a small, unnoticed group into a continental power, shaping the cocaine market across Europe and setting the stage for further expansion. As the Albanian network solidified its control over the cocaine trade, attention turned to protecting the immense wealth they were generating. Billions of euros were flowing through their operations, and moving this money without attracting scrutiny became a critical challenge. Simple cash transactions were no longer sufficient. They needed a system capable of disguising the origin and destination of funds while maintaining access to liquidity for their operations. Money laundering became the next stage of their empire building, and the Albanians approached it with the same careful planning, discipline, and innovation that had allowed them to dominate the cocaine routes. Their strategy relied on a combination of legitimate businesses, shell companies, and international banking. Nightclubs, taxi companies, import-export firms, and small factories became fronts, allowing large sums of money to be integrated into legal systems. Each business had a purpose. Some were designed to justify sudden inflows of cash, others to funnel funds across borders, and a few to provide employment for operatives who needed cover identities. By spreading investments across multiple industries and countries, they minimized risk, ensuring that the seizure of one asset would not threaten the entire operation. Real estate also played a key role in their laundering strategy. Apartments, warehouses, and commercial properties were purchased across Europe, from Berlin to Milan to Belgrade. Luxury buildings provided both a store of wealth and a legitimate explanation for financial activity. Properties were often purchased through layers of companies in Cyprus, the Balkans, and Dubai, making it nearly impossible for authorities to trace ownership. These holdings not only legitimized illicit profits, but also offered strategic bases for operations, storage, and meetings. The Albanians also took advantage of banking systems, moving funds through accounts held in multiple countries and transferring money through currencies, shell corporations, and complex trade arrangements. Even when investigators identified suspicious patterns, the true owners were nearly impossible to pinpoint. Every transaction was a puzzle layered with multiple levels of deception, designed to mislead authorities and rival groups alike. This meticulous attention to detail meant the network could continue operating at full capacity, while the movement of wealth remained largely invisible. Despite the sophistication of their financial operations, internal discipline remained critical. Members responsible for money laundering were carefully vetted and closely monitored. Any deviation, careless mistake, or unnecessary attention could risk the entire network. Codes of conduct ensured that each participant understood the stakes, and loyalty was reinforced with both rewards and subtle consequences. By combining trust with rigorous oversight, the Albanians maintained control over one of the most complex aspects of their empire without alerting authorities. Through this financial infrastructure, the network's influence extended far beyond street-level control of drugs. They were now a continental power capable of sustaining long-term operations, investing in legal markets, and insulating themselves against disruption. While law enforcement continued to make seizures and arrests, the core of the Albanian empire remained intact, protected by layers of secrecy, legal cover, and financial cunning. Their empire was no longer just a criminal operation. It was a sophisticated economic machine that could operate invisibly, generate immense wealth, and survive shocks that would destroy less disciplined organizations. By the end of this phase, the Albanian network had achieved what few criminal organizations had ever managed. They controlled supply, distribution, and finances simultaneously. They had transformed from a quiet, disciplined group of migrants into a well-organized empire, capable of moving drugs, money, and influence across Europe with precision and secrecy. Their ability to integrate illegal profits into legal systems secured their power, making the network resilient, adaptive, and nearly untouchable, a shadow empire operating in plain sight. Even the most carefully built empires are vulnerable to chance, and for the Albanian network, that moment came unexpectedly in the port of Antwerp. A container arrived earlier than scheduled due to a storm at sea, drawing the attention of Belgian customs officers conducting routine checks. Inside, hundreds of kilograms of high-quality cocaine were discovered, carefully hidden within crates of ordinary goods. This single discovery, seemingly random, triggered a chain reaction that law enforcement had long awaited. Patterns began to emerge as investigators traced the markings on the bricks, linking them to previous seizures across Europe. What had once appeared as isolated incidents was now starting to reveal the outline of a vast, organized network. Authorities moved cautiously, aware that a direct assault on the network could drive operations further underground. They began monitoring key ports, trucking companies, and warehouses across multiple countries, using a combination of surveillance, informants, and digital monitoring. What they discovered was both alarming and impressive. A network so disciplined that even under observation, it remained largely invisible. Yet cracks were beginning to show. Small mistakes, minor delays, and internal disagreements started to appear as pressure mounted. Members who had previously operated with complete confidence now grew anxious, aware that law enforcement was finally closing in. Internal tension compounded the problem. The network's strict discipline and loyalty had been its greatest strength, but under scrutiny, even minor disagreements became sources of suspicion. Members worried that others might betray them, either to save themselves or in an attempt to seize greater power. The careful balance of trust and secrecy began to fray, with operatives taking greater risks to protect themselves or to accelerate shipments before detection. This created vulnerabilities that investigators could exploit, although the full scale of the organization remained elusive. At the same time, rival groups noticed the disturbances. While the Albanians had long dominated supply and distribution, whispers of law enforcement pressure encouraged smaller gangs to test boundaries, attempt thefts, or interfere with shipments. The Albanians responded with calculated measures, not brute force, reinforcing loyalty and reasserting control. Yet every move required careful planning, as overreaction could draw further attention and threaten the stability of the empire they had built over decades. Law enforcement. The breakthrough in Antwerp represented the first real chance to understand the inner workings of the network. Surveillance teams began mapping connections between ports, trucking firms, and warehouses, while financial investigators traced suspicious transfers that had previously gone unnoticed. Patterns in encrypted communications, once indecipherable, now began to reveal operational strategies. Each seizure, each observation, and each financial anomaly provided pieces of a puzzle that had been meticulously hidden for years. Despite the pressure, the network did not collapse immediately. Its structure, built on compartmentalization and secrecy, allowed operations to continue even as investigators closed in. Some shipments still reached their destinations, and some members remained completely insulated from scrutiny. Yet the cracks were widening. Fear, mistrust, and minor operational failures signaled that the once invincible empire was vulnerable. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation, one that would test the resilience of the Albanian network and determine whether it could survive the scrutiny of coordinated international law enforcement, or whether the empire would finally be exposed. By the end of this phase, it was clear that the Albanians were no longer operating with impunity. The combination of chance discovery, careful investigation, and internal strain marked the beginning of a turning point. What had been invisible and untouchable was now exposed to the sharpest eyes of European authorities. The empire that had grown quietly and efficiently over decades was starting to show signs of vulnerability, revealing that even the most disciplined and secretive networks could be challenged when luck, timing, and persistent investigation converged. The operation that ultimately exposed the Albanian network was unprecedented in scope and coordination. Every port, warehouse, and trucking route suspected of involvement was monitored. Investigators had pieced together a picture of the network's operations, revealing the complexity and scale of an empire that had remained hidden for years. The culmination of these efforts was a series of synchronized raids designed to strike multiple targets simultaneously, preventing members from warning each other or fleeing in time. When the raids began, warehouses in Belgium, the Netherlands, Spain, and Germany were stormed. Trucks were intercepted, and financial accounts were frozen. Investigators discovered hidden compartments, encrypted communication devices, and carefully concealed caches of cocaine. The operation revealed the network's reach across Europe, from ports to cities, and its sophisticated integration of legitimate businesses with illegal operations. The sheer scale of the network stunned authorities. Documents, ledgers, and digital records uncovered in the raids provided evidence of supply chains, financial transfers, and the involvement of members who had previously operated in complete anonymity. Even as the raids succeeded in disrupting the network, some leaders had already anticipated the possibility and vanished before authorities could reach them. Using safe houses and pre-arranged escape routes, they disappeared into South America, the Middle East, and other regions where European law enforcement had limited reach. Dozens of members were in custody, facing long prison sentences, and significant quantities of cocaine and illicit wealth had been seized. And new leaders were likely already positioning themselves to restore control. Raids also revealed the ingenuity and discipline that had allowed the network to thrive for years. Investigators were forced to acknowledge that this was not a chaotic criminal organization driven by greed or violence, but a carefully orchestrated empire that combined logistics, finance, and secrecy in ways that rivaled legitimate businesses. The Albanian network had mastered patience, observations, and planning, creating a model of criminal enterprise that was difficult to infiltrate or dismantle. The raids marked a significant victory for European law enforcement, exposing a criminal empire that had operated invisibly for decades.